Hey guys, here's the deal. I've got an excellent deal for you. You either get to be democratic capitalist, door number 1, or a parking lot, door number 2. Those are your call. Which do you wish to be? And they said, we think we'll take door number 1. Japan demilitarizes after World War II. Why does Japan demilitarize? Because this was wildly popular? It was not wildly popular. Yeah. Well, no, why did the example? I'll give you an answer to that. And you're not going to like my answer. The question is, why does the attempt to make a democracy in Germany work so well, but not in Afghanistan? I may give you my answer. You have to promise not to punish me for my answer. I'm going to give you an analytical answer. What I believe actually is going on. The problem is not, let me tell you what the problem is not. The problem is not that Germany is a developed society and inherited a developed society and therefore became a democracy, whereas Afghanistan is a 7th century tribal society. That's not the problem. The problem is that the Americans went into Germany and systematically destroyed its previously existing elite and spent 10 years occupying the place, reconstructing everything from the bottom up and conducting ruthless purges of high-level Nazis, including holding war trials for the Nazis. In short, the Americans destroyed the social basis of anti-democratic power in Germany. Whereas all the Americans ever did in Afghanistan is arm a few people to go kick out the Taliban and left the entire social basis of a kin-structured, non-democratic society in place. In short, my answer is politically incorrect because I'm saying the problem isn't that the Americans destroyed too much in Afghanistan. From the standpoint of democracy, they didn't destroy the right things and they didn't destroy enough. Because they destroyed a lot more in Germany and Japan. A lot more. The level of restructuring was much, much higher. Now, you don't have to agree with me. That's what I think. I think to go in and make a country into a democracy is a gigantic amount of work, which almost always fails. And it almost always fails because democracy is not simply about building a parliament and having elections. It's about having the social basis of democracy and destroying the social power of those who oppose democracy. That requires a huge amount of effort and normally a gigantic amount of violence. That violence is usually carried out domestically over the course of history in countries. It's not usually imposed from the outside. The case of the United States is a good case in point. It required a civil war to destroy the social basis of anti-democratic power in the South. Without a civil war in the United States would have never become a democracy, ever. It took blood, lots of blood. And it's very typical. It doesn't make the United States at all unique. So if you're going to go in and impose a democracy on a country, you better be ready to stay for a long time and do a lot of hard work, including unpleasant work. That's my answer. Yeah. This is a theory for understanding politics, international politics. Bipolarity is not necessarily a trait of realism. What realism tells you to do is to count the poles. How many poles are there? Right? You look at the structure of the system. And all you do is look at the capabilities of the sides. So, foreign policy thinkers tend to either share this view or not share this view. I'll give you an example. Kissinger. Kissinger is a classic realist. He doesn't care about the regime type. Whether a country's a democracy or not a democracy, he's not a neocon, by the way. As people are totally confused by this. Canadians are always confused by it. He's an old-fashioned conservative, an old-fashioned realist conservative. He looks at the capabilities of a country and whether or not they're suitable for balancing off against the people we don't like, who are we're worried about their capabilities. And so that's really what realists do. It's a way of looking at the world. It ignores. It's actually quite conservative in many ways. They don't care about human rights at all. They don't care about human rights. They don't care about democracy. They don't care about any of that stuff. They don't care if the leader is rational, irrational. They don't care about that. What they care about is the structure of the international order. How many poles are there? How strong are those poles? You understand? More questions? Yeah. You gotta speak louder, I can't hear you. Yeah. There are little wars that go on, but there are no big global wars. Right? Yeah, I mean, it is a function of the biggest powers. The biggest powers were Western, except, of course, the other one. It was not, I mean, it depends how you define the Russians. Were they Western? Were they not Western? I don't know. Half of Russia's in Asia. So, no, I mean, it's not, but you could conceive of a global order in which China and Africa were the two most powerful places in the world. And they then led, with their hegemony, the whole world. It doesn't necessarily have to be racial or east-west at all. It could just be, it's really just looking at the capabilities, the power capabilities of the area. You're right, it just so happens that the most powerful places in the world are now in the West. It doesn't always have to be that way. Japan has, as we know, previously challenged the global order. China may be there pretty soon. China may constitute, I mean, remember, this is just Cold War realism. We haven't even got to after the Cold War yet. China may be the next great power. It could, if it decides, look, if China has been growing now at the rate of 8% a year for the last 20 years. 20 years. Now, it appears to be, for the most part, channeling that growth into domestic consumption. I was told the other day that 500 million people in Asia are entering the middle classes. It's going to create a great market. It was actually a headhunter who was recruiting me to be a professor at a different university in Asia. Not going so fast. That's where they're pumping the money now. Do you believe that they will not, at some point, try to transform their increasing economic wealth to secure those gains with military power? I think, my personal view on this, I mean, I don't know. Obviously, the future is hard to predict. Everything else we know about every other country that has become economically powerful in global history is they always attempt to secure their economic gains with military power, to protect their sea lanes, to protect their trade routes, and to conquer more. Why should China be any different? It would be racist of me, would it not, to assume that they are different? That they're like somehow more virtuous than the British, or virtuous than the Americans, or virtuous than the Germans, or virtuous than the Soviets. I don't think they're any more virtuous. I think they're no worse or better. That's my answer to your question. More questions? Yeah. After the Cold War, you mean? The American realism ended up causing troubles for the United States after the end of the Cold War. Now, you have to understand this is not necessarily, realism believes that actually all countries follow this. Canada does too. We pursue our interests. You see, realism says that, what do Canadians do? Canada, realists would argue that Canada Canadian discourse on foreign policy is just a bunch of hypocrisy. They would argue that, what does Canada do? We talk about, oh, wouldn't it be nice if everybody were equal in the United Nations and global governance and oh, wouldn't it be good? We're not going to talk about interests, we're going to talk about values. We have Canadian values. Right? You say, yeah, you know who talks about values? Weak people. The weak. Canada or strong, we talk about values. We talk about interests. Canadians have, in fact, that's what they have. Canadians have interests. And they pursue their interests. But they feel so guilty about pursuing their interests. And they talk about it in terms of values. They feel good about themselves. Oh, yeah, I pat myself on the back. We're wonderful. We're nice. We're good. We're not exploiting the world. Anybody here take a trip out to the tar sands lately? Exploitation. Please. Please. The only thing we're afraid of is the Americans, not that they will buy our oil, we're afraid that they'll stop buying our oil. That's what you have to fear, what a realist would say. That's not me. I'm just telling you what a realist would say. So, yeah. Did the Americans face heat for doing this? Yeah. Partially. Partially. Except for everybody else in the world who wanted to be exactly like the United States. You want to eat like Americans, dress like Americans, watch what the Americans watch, and you all expressed your deep individuality last night by watching the Oscars. Yeah, that's it. The bastion of American cultural imperialism. Not just the Oscars, of course, but we all know when you were actually watching the red carpet. And you're giggling because, of course, you realize how right I am. So yeah, they took some heat for it, but they could also say, hey, United States? Yeah, of course people don't like the United States. You know what the United States is? It's the operating system of the world. It's the Windows. It's the Windows. It is the order. Here were your choices. You could have that order. What was the alternative order? Oh yeah, you could go join the communist bloc. Enjoy. Bye. See ya. Or you could be part of this order. And what did that order mean? It meant the 11 carrier battle groups around the world, making sure as all the European leftists marched in the streets against American imperialism, their homes were heated by the guarantee that those American task forces supplied, that the oil would keep on flowing. The Europeans were one aircraft carrier away from starving, from freezing in their apartments in the wintertime. So they could criticize. They could enjoy the order while criticizing the providers of that order. That's what the Americans could argue back. That's what the realists would argue back. That's the order. You don't like the order? Come up with a new order. Come up with a new order. But don't pretend that by voting NDP you're coming up with a new order. Get serious. They're part of the order. That is the order. I'm trying to talk like a realist here. All that stuff about international organizations and international law, they last as long as the United States wants it to last. The United States spends more on the military than every other country in the world combined. So it's that whole thing when Obama goes to Saudi Arabia and bows before the Saudi king as a sign of respect. That's fine. He was doing this as a sign of respect. I understand. But let's face it for a minute. The Saudi king should be bowing to Obama because he rules exactly as long as Obama wants him to rule and not one day more. Not one day longer. He's one Trump strike away, folks. It's not like the Saudis are going to send a drone to Washington. That's the global order. More questions? See, I got to cut out 15 or 20 minutes here from the, because I'm only at 109, lovely. Wait, I can't see. Yes. I can't hear you. Why do you think Canada has never won? Why does not Canada have typical American interests? Canada has very typical American interests. Canada is the most American country I've ever been to in my life, outside of America. Canada depends upon the United States. We love the United States. We ship our goods to the United States. We send our old people to the United States. We consume American culture. We speak like Americans. How more frickin' American can we be? What? Well, we have socialized healthcare. That's good. That's good. I mean, yeah, we're a little bit different in that respect. I'm not playing down the differences. I think there are differences between the states of the United States that are somehow different, that are greater than between Canada and the United States. That's a different issue. You know, we profess different values. I'm trying to speak like a realist here. I remember, each day I come in, I pretend to be a different theorist. I'm not saying I believe anything I'm saying. Although I'm saying with a little too much conviction, I crank that. That Canada claims to have different interests. It actually doesn't even do that. It claims to have different values. We value multilateralism. Of course we value multilateralism, what realists would say, because you're weak. That's the discourse of the weak. Strong countries don't favor multilateralism. They go do what they can do. So we talk a good game of multilateralism. We talk that. In fact, what we do is we take the order that the United States provides, and let's face it, we're in a good situation here, right? We've got snow in the north, fish in the east, fish in the west, and friends to the south. You know, mostly friends. Right? That's Canada. So, yeah, we have these differences. The differences can sometimes feel profound. And I'm not saying they're not big. They are. But from the standpoint of the really big questions of global politics, when you're a realist, you look at the capabilities, what are we going to do? What are we going to do as Canada? Who are we going to side with? We're going to make an alliance against the United States? You want to get into that? Which countries are going to join this alliance with us against the United States? The balance. You're going to put straight some soldiers along that border running from Ontario to BC? You're going to do that? Put some tanks there? Maybe some nuclear weapons? To guarantee your sovereignty? What are you going to do? No. You're going to declare them to yourself to be their best friend. For always. BFFs. That's the intelligent thing to do, and enjoy the order. And then let your young people go to universities and criticize them for a couple of years until they join it too. You can't believe that? I'm speaking like a realist again, folks. Last question before I push on. Yeah. Yeah. How would realists respond to the transnational things like the internet or corporations? How would realists respond? Like the Chinese government. That's how they respond. You don't like a website, you shut it down. That's what you do. You don't like a company, what it's doing, you don't allow it in. Go take your business elsewhere, you don't get the world's largest market. Bye. All of these things, the realists would argue, are still regulated by the nation state. The nation state is what matters. Nothing else really matters. The other stuff is peripheral BS. That all your professors out there who want to talk about all these other things, it's just because they're bored. They don't want to pay attention to the things that matter anymore. The things that matter are the big nation states. Are the nation states out there, and the ones that really matter are the big nation states, the ones that provide the orders. There are order makers and order takers. And America is an order maker, and Canada is an order taker. Do I sound hard-ass enough? I'm not very good at this, but you see. Let's push on. So you have of course, an instance of instability in the Cold War. And we saw how scary that was. 1962, I'm 1 year old. My mother is out there told to go buy groceries because the world may come to an end. And we don't realize exactly how much the world was going to come to an end. Cuban Missile Crisis. There you have Castro with his good buddy Nikita Khrushchev, who's the head of the Soviet Union. Castro declares himself to be a Marxist-Leninist. Khrushchev says, "We love you. We will defend you." And they placed nuclear weapons in Cuba to defend it against an American invasion, which the Americans had already tried once, by the way. Just in case I forgot that point. The Bay of Pigs incident. The U.S. discovers these and says to Khrushchev, they gotta go, and we're going to blockade Cuba. And we will view any hostilities out of Cuba as, in effect, an attack from the Soviet Union on the United States. So if we attack Cuba and attempt to remove these missiles, and you attempt to fire them at the United States, we will destroy the Soviet Union. Things got a little heated. So the question is how does a realist analyze this? Well, what becomes American, or kind of the way that it's developed in the United States and U.S. Academy, is that what you would do is you would look for the great powers. You would ignore Castro. Castro's not important. He's a big player in all of this, according to the realist. This is the U.S. versus the Soviet Union, in effect. Everything is the U.S. versus the Soviet Union. You don't even look at the personalities of the president, not the dumpling peasant, Khrushchev, and the Hollywood actor, Kennedy. You don't even look at their personalities. They don't matter that much. What matters is the balance of capabilities. That's how a realist proceeds. Hold on. Okay. Let me go back. One of the great tools that's used to understand nuclear weapons during the Cold War is what's called the prisoner's dilemma. Game theory. Anybody here know any game theory? Where do you learn this game theory? Where do you learn it? Yeah, economics. Good. So you take some economics. Good. Game theory is invented during the Cold War. So where do you have it? It starts off with the classic, what's called the prisoner's dilemma. Anybody know this? Good, good. So you're going to correct me if I'm wrong. Kind of know. So, prisoner's dilemma. It's a classic case. You've seen it on Law and Order many times. Two people commit a crime. The cops catch them. They put them in different rooms. And here's what they tell them. This is important. Here's what they tell them. If you rat out your partner, if you refuse to confess, not something. If you refuse to confess, and your partner confesses, you will get 5 years in jail, and your partner will get 0. If it's the other way around, if you confess, and your partner doesn't, your partner will get 5 years in jail, and you'll get 0. If you both refuse to confess, you'll each get 3 years. If you both confess, you'll each get 1 year. Can I make one little amendment here? This is 0, these should be 0, 0. Forget about 3, 3. I want to change the payoff structure. I don't like that payoff structure. 0, 0. That is to say, if you both cooperate with each other and refuse to confess, you'll both get 0 time in prison. If you both confess, you'll each get a year. The one who confesses, in the case that one doesn't, will get 0, and the other one will get 5. What happens under these circumstances? What is the rational payoff? What is the rational behavior under these circumstances? They both confess. They both confess. That's the rational thing. You worry that the other guy is not going to, right? So you worry about getting 5 years in prison. You'll take 1 year in prison. You see? Even though if you both did nothing, if you both said no, we both didn't do it, you both get 0. So this kind of situation, this prisoner's dilemma, produces behavior in which both sides defect from cooperation with each other. Because the logical thing to do, really the optimal thing to do would be to cooperate with each other. The prisoners cooperate with each other, and they both get 0 years in prison. Understand? That's basic game theory. Now let's change the game. Thermonuclear war. That's the payoff structure I wanted at number 1. Rather than defect, don't defect, it's don't launch, launch. Those are millions of dead, rather than years in prison. If you both don't launch, which has been the situation we've always been until now, nobody dies. If you launch first, you only lose 1 million, and the other side loses 10 million. The other side launches first, you lose 10 million, and they only lose 1 million. And so therefore, like in the prisoner's dilemma, the logical thing to do is for both sides to reduce their losses by launching their nuclear weapons. Which is really interesting. Because it's very powerful stuff. It really raises the question why we never did have a nuclear war during the Cold War. We came close. We came close. Now, how do you escape from the prisoner's dilemma? Well, this becomes one of the lessons of the Cuban Missile Crisis. Because the Cuban Missile Crisis was dictated not just by realism, but also by 2 other levels of analysis. By what goes on in the bureaucracies. You had lots of expertise within the United States. You had standard operating procedures within the military. The bureaucratic politics hypothesis says, in fact, the way you structure your expertise, the way you structure your domestic politics, is going to matter a great deal for how you behave. So you look at civilian versus military views, and we know that the military wanted Kennedy to go launch. And ultimately, Kennedy was in charge, and he refused to. Think about a different situation, a different country, if the military would be more powerful. You might have had a very different outcome. That realism could not have accounted for. And of course you have the personalities, which neither realism nor bureaucratic politics account for. Because in many ways, these guys were drawn from central casting. Khrushchev, the impetuous, practical, uneducated peasant. Kennedy, the inexperienced, weak American leader. Arguably, both of those features made the crisis even more dangerous than it otherwise could have been. And yet, ultimately, the crisis is solved. Both sides stand down. when the Americans